Hello and welcome to MalMakes. Today we're doing a painting of Animal Crossing New Leaf. This is the full version. If you're interested in the time-lapse, you can click on the card here. Otherwise, let's get started. I've been playing Pocket Camp and while it's been fun, it just really makes me want to play a full Animal Crossing game. So I got out my DS and I started playing Animal Crossing New Leaf again, and it was just New Year's, so I thought it would be fun to do a fireworks painting. So I did a rough sketch in my sketchbook, and then I went and did Sharpie and I realized I wanted to change some things. But for the most part, I'm going to have the sky up here with the fireworks, and then I'm going to have kind of that round world that it has, and I'm going to start to bring in some elements. Like there's going to be a little bit of a cliff over here, there's going to probably be a rock somewhere, and then like the hole in the ground for the fossils. I'll probably have like a bridge with one of the fish shadows, and over here I had drawn one of the villagers' houses, but I think I might just do the first house you get before you do any of the upgrades, and just kind of place that there instead. And on the bridge I decided I wanted to have Isabelle for sure, and I wanted to have some other character, and I decided on a player character. And you know, there's so many different things you can do with it, so I thought it might be nice just to do a player character that kind of represented Villager from Smash Brothers, because it's just kind of a generic player character that you could have in Animal Crossing. And I'm going to be starting with the sky, so I'm going to do kind of like a light purple, but not a super light purple, fading into kind of a light magenta down towards the bottom. So I'm going to mix both of those up and then just do a gradient across the entire canvas. So the two colors I'm using for the sky are these two right here. This is a lot of cyan with a little bit of magenta, and this is a lot of magenta with a little bit of cyan. And they both have just a touch of titanium white to lighten them up. So I'm taking the red violet and I'm painting towards the bottom. And I'm putting a lot down here and then just trying to bring it up a little bit onto this raw canvas. And I'm trying to make like a nice transition between this. Just because once I switch to the blue, I'll want to do the same thing but in the opposite direction until they just kind of meet, and I'll work both colors back and forth until I have a really nice sky gradient. Going back to my sketchbook, my next layer is going to be stars. I'm working back to front, so it's things that are real far away, working my way to the things that are closer, like the ground and the bridge here. So with the stars, I'm using liquid white, and this is golden high flow and titanium white inside of this empty paint marker. I've just filled it up, and I'm going to start by filling in some of the bigger stars. And then I'm going to take some of the same liquid white on my palette with a tiny paintbrush and do some smaller groupings of smaller stars. Just like real life, stars have colors, so I've mixed up some of that liquid white with some other colors. So this is the liquid yellow with it, and I'm just adding it to some of the stars to give it some color. I had used chalk pastel to mark in the stars, just so I had a good idea of how it was going to look when I was done. But they're still wet, so I can't erase any of the extra chalk. And like I did move some of them, like this one over here, the one closest to my fingernail is chalk, and the blue one is the one I ended up painting. But once it's dry, I can just take a wet towel and erase everything extra. But in the meantime, I'm going to work on starting to fill in my ground plane. I'm going to use a chalk pastel to kind of block in the edge of it and where it's going to go, and then some of the cliffs over here. The next thing I'm working on is the cliff face here, and then just a little bit of rock that shows on the shoreline. So I've mixed up kind of like a neutral bluish color, and I made it with the blue sky color I still had with some burnt umber and burnt sienna. So this was kind of the base I made with those, and then I darkened it with some more burnt umber, and then I lightened it with some white and more burnt sienna just to make it a little bit more brown. Now this isn't going to be the entire color of the rock face, but it's going to kind of be a good base to start to fill in the shapes. And because I want to have things lit up from the fireworks, some of the true daylight colors of the rocks are going to be shown a little bit kind of on the edges, but I need to get these base colors down first. I was having trouble painting the cliffs, and it was just because some of the purple was showing through. I just really needed a good base to work on top of, so I used my second highlight color just to do the base over here, and then the far edge of the river, and the far edge of the close part of the river, just to give myself that good primed base coat. So then in my sketchbook, I just tried doing some different techniques for the cliffs. I was trying to bring in some of the banding from the game here, but I wasn't liking how it was looking in paint. And then down here, I really liked how these turned out. And I'm kind of torn between both, so I think I'm going to kind of use the best parts of both and put them together. Like the shadows are done the same, and I like some of this texture I was bringing in here, but I think it's too small and I just need to kind of do somewhere halfway in between both of these. I've drawn in where the breaks in the rock are going to be in chalk pastel. That way I don't have to think about like if this is going to be like out or in compared to the ones next to it. So I'm taking my highlight color, and what it is, it's the same color I had here, which is kind of like a sand. I took some burnt sienna and lightened it up, and then I also mixed in a little bit of gray to it. Just to make it a little bit more neutral. And I'm going to use this as my highlight. So I'm going to start to bring in kind of where the bright parts are in the rock. As I'm working on this painting, I'm really thinking about where my light source is, and it's going to be the fireworks that sit right here. So it's going to cast light on the front of these cliffs, the faraway shore of the river, and then this shore sits in shadow because if they're a little bit further back, it's going to kind of hit this front part and not cast so much on the side that sits here. Now because it does sit at an angle, I'm putting a little bit of highlight along the bottom, and then the top of it is going to be in light here where the grass is. So I wanted to bring a little bit along the top. And as I'm doing that, I'm thinking about where my shadows are going to go too. So I've mixed up kind of a dark blue color, and it's basically just my sky color with a little bit of black, and it's going to be my shadows wherever the bright parts aren't, basically. So I'm taking this shadow color and starting to fill it in where the deepest shadows are going to be. Once I've gone through all my colors, including that base layer again, I'm going to bring in a little bit more highlights because I covered them up too much, and a little bit more of my darkest shadows because those kind of got lost too. I spent a good amount of time redrawing the house just because I really liked how it turned out the first time, and I didn't want to lose that with the placement and exactly how everything was. So I decided to make it perfect, and then I would just kind of work around it. Now I'm going to do a base layer of green for the grass and a base layer of blue for the water. Once the green was dry, I took my chalk pastel and started to block in some of the things I had lost. And I also started to draw in like where the grass is going to be worn away from running around. I do want to kind of have that there so it starts to look natural and more alive like an actual Animal Crossing village. So this color I have here is Titan Buff with just a little bit of primary magenta just to kind of warm it up. I'm going to clean up a few spaces, but mostly just fill in like where these areas are going to go. To fill in the sand parts that are in shadow, and there's not many, just kind of here along the house, I've mixed up some of that base color I had down here with a little bit of violet, and I'm just going to fill it in right here in the shadow of this house. I really like how the dirt is forming. It looks kind of natural, like you come out of the house and go over the bridge and go off this way. And I like that shape, but it looks very much like sand pits on a golf course right now. So I need to add some detail to the dirt, and then I can start to work on the grass to kind of overlap it into this part. So for this, I'm going to do kind of like this swirly wet in wet mix of my base color, which is Titan Buff and Magenta, and then the darker color, which is this color here, which is a mix of some things from a long time ago with magenta also. So I'm going to remix up some more of both of these and then add the detail. The way I'm adding in this detail is I'm starting with this base color, which is the Titan Buff with magenta, and I'm going to fill in a good layer of it kind of in here. And it's mostly just to get it wet with the paint again, because I want the darker color to swirl in and mix here on the canvas. I really want to finish the grass because it's actually kind of intimidating. Between switching from dirt to grass, changing colors with the shadows under the tree and the house, also on the horizon it gets lighter, so there's a lot to think about just with color changing, but on top of all of that there's a texture. On the ground in Animal Crossing you get shapes, and it changes based on like where you are in the year, and like after you go through a whole year cycle it'll change. So I do want to do the triangles because that's most well known, and I really do need to bring those in, but I'm going to worry about my color changes first. So I have two new colors mixed up. This color I still have on my palette, but it's way too dark for how light I've made everything else and how bright I plan to make the fireworks. So I need lighter greens to work with. So I have a yellow green here that I added some titanium white in, and then this is the same thing with less titanium white. And I took a little bit of a red violet to just tone it down a little bit because it was just too saturated of a green. So I'm going to use the light color here along the edge of the dirt, right along the horizon. I'm going to use a darker color kind of to blend into these bigger spaces. And then as I need to, I'll just use a little bit of blue to add in some of these shadows underneath things. I'm really happy with how the shapes are starting to form, and it's starting to really look like Animal Crossing. But I think this color is way too light, and in my sketchbook I did make a note where I thought I should have three colors, like a light, a medium, and then a darker color, and I didn't end up doing that on the canvas. So I've mixed up a darker color that I have here, and I'm going to use that and just kind of do another layer of dark and kind of just leave it so you can see a little bit of this green too. The ground changes so much in Animal Crossing. Not only do the colors change based on what season you're in, but the shapes do change too. Like one year it'll be triangles, and then after it snows and you get back into spring, it might be circles or squares. But when I think about it, I think triangles. So that's why I've done the triangles. And I've mixed up a few different greens. I'm going to use these other lighter ones, a brown green, maybe even something in between some of these, just to fill in these triangles. Now they're a little bit bigger towards the bottom, and they're smaller and stretched out as they get towards this little bit of a top bar I have here. I'm not doing them all the way to the horizon because you can't see that far and the game doesn't render it anyway, so I'm just going to maybe do a little bit of indication a little bit further than this line. I'm also going to kind of blend it into the solid green and to the transition where it changes to dirt here. And I'm going to do that by taking my base green color and mixing it with glazing liquid to kind of make a transparent version of that color. And I'm going to blend on top of these far away triangles and then right along the transition just to blend the triangles into those colors. To blend the triangles in with the rest of the green, I'm using acrylic glazing liquid, and this one's in satin, but you could use matte or gloss. And I took some of my base color, this base green, with a little bit of that acrylic glazing liquid, and I'm just going to kind of paint in between the two and bring it down on top of these triangles, just to start obscuring them. Now, it's a small transition, and it's going to take a few layers of this to make it look natural and fade really good between the two. I really like the river color I made. It's too dark for what I want to do, but it's a really good color to do the shadow for the bridge and like where the fish shadow is going to be, and then just a little bit along this far side here. So I'm going to mix up a lighter color by taking this base color, adding a little bit of white, and maybe a little bit of magenta to make it a little bit more violet, and I'm going to lighten up the river but keep a little bit of this dark part. In order to make the water look deep, I'm taking some of the darker blue that I had and mixing it with more acrylic glazing liquid, so it's a transparent version. And I'm just going to cover a little bit of the shoreline here in the shadow part and then also in the highlight part. I want to have these highlights on top of the water, so I started by kind of drawing these shapes that are kind of like amoeba-like, but they fit together like a puzzle. And I had done that right here, but it's not really helping me out a ton for what I plan to do, so I started just to kind of scribble some lines to help me sort of see where things are going to go around this river bend and then out this way. So to fill this in for these bright lights on top of the water, I'm using a smaller brush with a transparent blue. I took the blue that's over here for the base and lightened it up and then added in some glazing liquid. And I'm just going to kind of fill in on these lines a little bit just to kind of start to make these shapes that go down the river. The detail on top of the river was just too bright. I'd hoped it would kind of dry and be a little bit darker, but that didn't happen. So once it was dry, I mixed up a new glaze of the darkest blue I had in the river, and then I just painted across the top of it, making sure it was actually very transparent, just to kind of darken it a little bit. And I'm happy with how it turned out. I had to lighten the shore just a little bit, and then darken the fish shadow I have. But while that's drying, I can't do the bridge, so I'm going to move on to everything else. I'm going to give everything kind of a base layer of its base color, and then I'll start doing the detail. So I'm starting with the rock, and I've mixed up kind of like a purple violet for it, and that's going to be the base you can see on the side that gets kind of lit up by the firework. I'm going to use white to lighten it and black to darken it, but on the shadow side, like the side that's not with the firework, I'm going to use a lot of blue to make it a lot cooler of a shadow, just like I will over on the house and a little bit I started here in the dirt. I'm going to continue working on blocking in everything, just choosing the color for it, and then in the shadow side just adding more blue. So for example, on the trunks of the trees I'm going to use burnt sienna, but I'm going to mix a little bit of blue because the left side is all in shadow and then the tree kind of gives a shadow onto the trunk too. I'm going back through these objects to add some more details, and I'm starting with the rock because I'm right-handed and I didn't want to like get my hand in the house when I'm working on the tree. So I'm using these same colors just to kind of round some of these out a little bit, make it look more like a rock. The pine trees are a little bit different from these deciduous trees. The color is a bit more of a blue-green instead of a yellow-green like these ones are, and they all kind of sit like fingers or hair for each tier. So I'm going to use deeper blue-greens, like darker ones for the undersides, and then like in here under the tiers, and then I'm going to use more of like a lighter blue-green for like the parts that are in the highlight. I changed the tree trunk over here because I realized it's not the same as the pine, so I just used a little bit of a lighter color and fixed it and did kind of the circles that go around the trunk. Now I'm ready to start on the canopies of these two trees, and I realized that this one was too small how I painted it. I wanted it to be a little bit bigger, and I'm thinking just proportionally compared to the trunk. So I just drew it where I wanted it to go, and as I do the leaves, I'll just kind of paint them down further to go to that line. I'm going to start with some of the darkest colors that I had over here, and do some leaves kind of on the bottom right, and then I'll do some more kind of built up on that are a little bit lighter, and I'm going to work all the way until I get to some of these lighter colors here, because I feel like the pine trees are more of like a blue-green and they're darker, whereas the leaf and the fruit trees are a little bit lighter and more yellow. The trees are done, and you can definitely see where the firework light is hitting the tree. But the other part of it is darker, so I just kind of darkened it up and didn't add as many light colors to this one. Now the other tree in the background is lit up a bit better, and it's just kind of because it's more behind where the firework is going to go, so I'm going to light the front of it up a bit more. But I'm moving on to the front part of the house. I've mixed up a new shadow color for the side of the house, and it's just a little bit more gray than the one that was there. It's also a little bit darker. But I'm going to use that color to do a shadow under the eaves and more of the face color to fill it in because it's really streaky, and doing another coat's going to really help that out. To do the roof, I took a T-square and drew in some horizontal lines, making sure they were evenly spaced. Then I'm going to take a darker blue and paint underneath each line, and do a mini value scale in between each from dark to light. I drew in the details for the face of the house, and I had to figure out where my vanishing point was, because even though I had drawn this line, I didn't really consider where the actual vanishing point should go. So I took a ruler and figured out about here is where my 1 point perspective dot is. So I put a little tiny dot there with chalk, and then I used it to start to fill in the bricks and the doorway. Now the door itself, because it's arched, is a little bit tricky, but you'll see that I had drawn a square first where my top line went to the vanishing point, and so did the bottom line, and that's kind of where the arch starts. The bottom line of that orthogonal was where it was going to start curving, and the top line was where the top of the curve was going to go. And then I just filled in that whole little rectangle box, went corner to corner, and then vertical, and the horizontal goes to the vanishing point. And then I could kind of round in the top of the doorway using that box because it shows the plane of where the door sits in perspective. Then I just erased all these extra corners, did the same thing inside of the door for the circle, and then kind of blocked in where the window goes. Now that I have all of those there, I'm just going to use a few colors, slightly grayish tones of some of the other things in the painting, and fill in these bricks. And I'm going to use some of these same wood tones for the door and fill that in too. I've really been having a hard time trying to get this roof right, so I decided to tape it off using some artist tape, and you can use something like this, or you can use like the painter's tape they use to paint walls. So I've taped off this part, and I'm going to use the same colors and really try and get a good transition between all of them. The bridge is blocked in, so I want to fill in the shadow next, and I want to do that before I do the details on the bridge, just because with the glaze, I don't want to accidentally paint on top of the bridge and then have to repaint the bridge and fix it. Right now, I'm going to be repainting it anyway to do the details, so it's a good time to do that shadow. So I've mixed up a dark blue glaze with some of this that I had over here, and I'm just going to fill it in underneath the bridge. And I'm going to probably have to do a couple layers to make sure it gets dark enough, just because the glaze is quite transparent, but I'm just going to keep filling everything in under the bridge out to this curved line I have. It's hard to explain what I'm doing when everything is so small. Like, my fingernail is almost bigger than this mailbox. And I used some cadmium red and some violet to do the details on it. I filled in the fence, I used a little bit more blue grays over here in the shadow, and then on the faces I used more white and regular gray. I also started to draw in where all of the stones for the bridge are going to go, but I haven't filled that out yet. And the next thing I want to do is I've mixed up this glaze, and it's a dark blue gray. And I'm going to use it to do the shadows underneath all of the trees and then along the house. When I did the details for the bridge, I basically started to draw in all of my shapes with black, and then I took the base color for each thing and then just lightened it up with a little bit more white. And I kind of inlined it here around each shape, and then I went back over the black with a dark gray just because the black wasn't working. It was just too dark for what I was doing. And then for the shadow parts, I did the same thing, but I just added a little bit of blue to all of the gray. While the bridge is drying, I'm going to move on to the fireworks. Because the figures are going to stand on the bridge, I need this to be dry before I do that. So I'm just taking a chalk pastel and I'm going to mark in exactly where I want these fireworks to go. I've drawn in the fireworks, and I referenced like actual fireworks instead of those in Animal Crossing. So I've done them all a little bit different, but I need to start by blocking them in with white first. And I'm going to be using some high flow titanium white in this paint marker, but I could easily just use it straight out of the bottle and use a brush to apply it. Once it's dry, I can start adding color, and I'm starting with a light yellow-orange color to kind of fill in some of the gold. Now, this whole firework I'm going to do gold, so I'm going to fill that in solid. All of the streaks that come up from the launch are going to be gold, and then all of the centers are going to be gold. The only place where there's going to be colors are on the tips of these two, and then just on the very far out pieces of the top one. This doesn't look lit up like it's an actual firework, so what I need to do is use some more white, some of that liquid white, and kind of go in the center of some of these things so they kind of look like they're glowing. I drew in Isabelle and Villager, and it took a little bit to get right, like exactly where I wanted to put them and like how tall they should be, but once I was happy with it, I used that same white I used on the fireworks to do their outlines. Now normally I would fill them in solid white because it gives me a nice blank space to do all of my colors on, but I didn't want to lose the inside detail, so I just kind of did the outlines. Now how I'm going to fill that in is I'm going to kind of pick some places, fill them in with white, let it dry, do the color, and then like pick some other places and fill those in white and do the color, and kind of just keep going through that until I have the entire character filled in. I've been working on my figures for a while, but I wanted to talk about a couple things. First is the shadows on the ground. Now you'll notice like this shadow goes off to the left, and then these ones come like straight down, and that's because the fireworks are right here. So it's going to cast light onto the tree here, and then the shadow onto the ground this way. The same with the house, it's getting cast this way. But right here in the middle, the shadow's getting cast almost straight back, so that's why they're in a different direction than these ones here. I also started to use a lot more blues on like the back sides of the characters, just because I was using blue to give my shades to everything else. So I wanted to continue that, so I used a lot more blue on the parts that would be in shadow for both characters. And we're done! We have a fireworks scene from Animal Crossing New Leaf. If you're interested in this piece, you could buy a poster or a phone case, or bid on this original canvas. There's links down below. Also, consider supporting me on Patreon. You can find out more at supportmal.com. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes of MalMakes, and I'll see you again here for another video game painting.